For months, the world waited in silence. A small dot in the night sky, barely visible even through the most powerful telescopes, had captured the full attention of every observatory on Earth. It was called 3I Atlas, an interstellar visitor, a traveler from another system, not a comet, not an asteroid, something older, something stranger. At first, scientists were calm, confident. They'd seen this before. Objects pass through our solar system all the time. Frozen rocks wandering from the void, brushing past the warmth of our sun before disappearing back into darkness. Predictable, simple, harmless. But this one wasn't. When 3I Atlas entered the solar wind, its behavior shifted. Subtle at first, like the flicker of a candle in a still room. Then it became impossible to ignore. Astronomers noticed the light curve. The way its brightness rises and falls wasn't following any known pattern. Usually, comets brighten as they approach the sun. Ice evaporates, dust scatters light, and the object glows more intensely. But 3I Atlas didn't follow the rules. Its light didn't fade or rise. It pulsed. Every few seconds, a steady blink, like a heartbeat echoing across the void. At first, the teams dismissed it. Instrument error, they said. Sensor calibration. Maybe a software glitch. But as the days passed, the pulses continued, perfectly timed, perfectly rhythmic, too exact to be random. And for the first time in years, science didn't have an answer. It started quietly, a whisper among the data analysts. What if it's not natural? The phrase spread through chat rooms, late-night calls, and dimly lit labs. Not natural. Those two words carried weight. They cut through reason, because once you let that idea in, you can't unsee it. The astronomers watched as the readings came in from multiple observatories. Chile, Hawaii, Japan, even one small amateur telescope in Italy. Every reading told the same story. Every pulse matched perfectly across thousands of miles. Someone compared the intervals to a human heartbeat. 72 pulses per minute. Exactly. Coincidence or something else? When you look up at the sky, you see stillness, stars frozen in eternity. But through a telescope, nothing stands still. Everything moves, slowly, gracefully, endlessly, except this. 3I Atlas moved like it knew it was being watched. Every adjustment of its trajectory was small, but deliberate. Tiny deviations, almost impossible to detect unless you were searching for them. Almost as if it was aligning itself, not for navigation, but for visibility, like it wanted to be seen. The world didn't know about it yet. Most of the data stayed within closed research groups, private channels, encrypted archives, because no one wanted to make a claim they couldn't prove. The scientific world doesn't deal in speculation. It deals in evidence. And evidence was all they had, but not the kind they could explain. It was around this time that something unexpected happened. NASA released a short press statement, neutral, harmless on the surface. They called 3I Atlas an unusually reflective object and said, "Further observation is required." That's all. But to those who had seen the raw data, the phrase, unusually reflective, was a quiet warning. Night after night, telescopes locked onto the same point in the sky. The team at Mauna Kea Observatory watched as the pulses continued, unwavering. Each flash of light lasted exactly 0.6 seconds. Each gap between flashes was precisely timed. There was no decay, no chaos, no randomness. It was like listening to a metronome, the rhythm of something mechanical. Some believed it could be tumbling, that the brightness changes came from rotation, like sunlight bouncing off a spinning object. But that would mean the pattern should vary as it drifted closer. It didn't. The rhythm stayed perfect, even as its speed increased. At this point, one scientist, a quiet astrophysicist named Dr. Keon Lee, decided to run a simulation. He modeled thousands of natural light variations from known comets and asteroids. Then he overlaid 3 Iatelis' pattern. The results didn't overlap, not even close. He tried adjusting the spin, the angle, the surface reflectivity. Nothing worked. No natural body could reproduce what they were seeing. When he plotted the data points, the pulses formed a geometric sequence, symmetrical, precise, deliberate. He stared at the graph for hours, then whispered the words that would echo through the community for years to come. This is intentional. Meanwhile, social media started to catch hints of the story. Anonymous leaks, pixelated graphs, speculation about an interstellar beacon. Most people dismissed it as another online conspiracy, but the timing couldn't be ignored. In one of the leaked images, the object's light seemed to fluctuate in a pattern resembling a binary code. Some amateur enthusiasts decoded it, mapping ones and zeros. Their results spelled a simple repeating phrase: 0011, 0011, the number 3, over and over again. 3I, the name of the object itself. Coincidence, or a mirror? By late January, the pulses grew fainter as the object neared the inner solar system. It was approaching perihelion, its closest point to the sun. Normally, this is when comets burst into brilliance, releasing gas and dust, forming tails that stretch across the sky. But 3I Atlas remained smooth, cold, unreactive, almost dormant. And yet the heartbeat continued, even stronger, like something was waking up. In one final observation before it vanished into the sun's glare, astronomers noticed a brief flare, a pulse so bright it saturated the detectors. For a few seconds, the entire frame turned white. Then, darkness, silence. Every reading flatlined. It was gone. Some believed it burned up. Others said it went dark intentionally, like a light turned off by a hidden hand. But deep down, every scientist watching that night felt the same quiet chill. It didn't die. It stopped watching. And in that moment, something shifted. For the first time, humanity felt small again, not because of distance, but because of attention. Because whatever 3I Atlas was, it had looked back. Somewhere out there, a silent machine, or maybe something beyond our understanding, had crossed the endless dark to face our star. And now it was gone. But what if it wasn't just passing by? What if it came for something? Because when the light vanished, the data didn't end. The instruments kept recording. And deep in the static, something else began. A second rhythm, slower, closer, like a reply. It started as a faint flicker on a computer screen, a small dip in light, repeating every 2.8 seconds. At first, no one noticed. No one ever does. Not right away, because the universe is full of noise, static, random flashes that mean nothing. But this one didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. The first observatory to catch it was in Chile. A technician, working late, spotted a rhythm that shouldn't exist. The glow from 3I Atlas, that interstellar object drifting through our solar system, was pulsing, like a slow, steady heartbeat. He thought it was a calibration error, rebooted the instruments, checked the sensors, but the pulses kept coming. Perfectly timed, unbroken, relentless. Every 2.8 seconds, flash, dark, flash, dark. Over and over again. By morning, the anomaly had reached Hawaii. Different hemisphere, different instruments, same pulse, same rhythm, the exact same interval down to the millisecond. That's when the emails began. Quiet at first, curious scientists comparing notes. Then more urgent. Are you seeing this too? And one by one, the world's telescopes confirmed it. From the Atacama Desert to the Canary Islands, to the peaks of Mauna Kea, every observatory saw the same thing. A cosmic metronome, ticking, ticking, in perfect unison across the sky. The odds of that happening naturally? Almost zero, because nothing in deep space moves with that kind of rhythm. Not comets, not asteroids, not even pulsars, those ancient stars that flicker in radio waves, could match this kind of precision. This wasn't a dying star gasping its last breath. This was something else, something intentional. Still, the scientists weren't ready to say it, because saying it meant crossing a line. So they blamed the equipment. They said maybe there was interference from satellites. Maybe cosmic rays hit the detectors. Maybe the software was misreading the data. But as the hours turned into days, the pulses didn't stop. They grew stronger, brighter, and more synchronized. As if whatever was producing them knew it was being watched. In the control room at Mauna Kea, a young researcher recorded the data manually. He stared at the pattern on his screen, a simple series of peaks and valleys, repeating every 2.8 seconds. He leaned back, whispering under his breath, "It's counting." His colleagues laughed it off. But deep down, no one was smiling, because no one could explain why an object millions of miles away would pulse like that. Not with that kind of order, not with that kind of precision. It was like the universe was tapping its finger against the window, waiting for someone to notice. Soon, the public caught wind, not through official channels, but through whispers. A few leaked graphs, a few screenshots that found their way to online forums. Alien beacon, artificial probe, machine heart. Headlines spread faster than the data itself, but the scientists stayed silent. Because they didn't have an answer, and because, secretly, they were afraid of the one they might find. Behind closed doors, a meeting was held. Representatives from NASA, ESA, JAXA, and several private labs. They reviewed the synchronized pulse data from every station. The graphs aligned so perfectly, it was unsettling. Each peak mirrored the next, like a song repeating the same note across instruments thousands of miles apart. But one detail stood out. Every 20 minutes, the pulse skipped. A slight delay, barely noticeable. But when converted to sound frequencies, the skip formed a pattern, a wave, a signature. And that signature was identical to a transmission recorded decades ago, one sent out by humanity itself, the Arecibo message, the first signal we ever broadcasted into the stars. Coincidence, they said again. Always coincidence. But coincidence starts to sound like denial when patterns refuse to break. As the world debated, 3I Atlas continued its journey, drifting closer to the sun. The pulses followed it like a heartbeat under stress. Faster, hotter, louder, At times it dimmed completely, before bursting back with blinding light, and every time it returned, the frequency sharpened, like it was adjusting, correcting, refining itself, almost like it was learning. Then something changed. On the night of December 14th, all observatories recorded a single anomaly. The pulse stopped. Total darkness. For 27 minutes, 3i Atlas went silent. Then, just as suddenly, it began again, but this time the rhythm was different. Slower. 3-second intervals now, and within each pulse, a faint modulation, a flicker within the flash. It wasn't just light anymore. It was information. Encoded, layered, intentional. Someone, or something, was trying to say something. The signals were fed into computers, translated into data streams, then into sound waves. What they heard sent chills down every spine in the room. It wasn't random noise, it was harmony. Soft, tonal, almost melodic, like a deep hum echoing across the void. No language, no message, just presence, as if it wasn't trying to communicate words, only to be noticed. The world outside didn't know any of this. To most, 3i Atlas was just another strange comet on its way past the sun. But to those who had seen the unfiltered data, those who'd listened to the pulse, it felt different. It felt alive, and that word changed everything. Because if it was alive, even in a mechanical sense, it meant someone built it. Somewhere far beyond our reach, there existed hands, or minds, capable of sending it here. In the following weeks, debates turned into arguments. Scientists split into two camps, those who believed it was a natural anomaly, and those who were convinced it was artificial. But deep down, everyone shared the same unspoken thought. If this really was a signal, who or what was it meant for? Because the pulse wasn't directed at the sun. It wasn't broadcasting into deep space. It was aimed directly at Earth. Every 2.8 seconds. Flash, dark, flash, dark, as if it were waiting for an answer. Then, one night, a strange phenomenon occurred. In the middle of a routine observation, every telescope tracking 3i Atlas experienced the same brief interference, a surge of static across the feed. The light vanished for less than a second, and when it returned, the rhythm was gone. No pulses. No signals, just silence, like a conversation that had ended. For hours, the teams checked their systems, desperate to find a reason. But the universe doesn't give reasons, only echoes. The pulse had stopped, but its absence was louder than anything before it, because silence, in a universe so full of chaos, is never random. It's intentional, it's deliberate, and maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for us to speak back. Space is cold, unimaginably cold. And yet, somehow something out there was breathing warmth. For days, 3i Atlas had been silent. The mysterious pulses, the rhythmic flashes that echoed through the cosmos, had stopped. Every telescope, every sensor, every pair of eyes on Earth waited for a sign. But what came next wasn't light. It was heat. At first, it looked like background noise, faint blips in the infrared spectrum. Most astronomers ignored it. Infrared signatures can be tricky, distorted by solar winds and cosmic dust. But when one research team overlaid the heat data with the old pulse patterns, Their screens froze. The temperature spikes matched perfectly with the rhythm of the light, 2.8 seconds apart. Each burst of warmth followed the same timing as the flash that came before. Like an echo, like a heartbeat that never really stopped. It was breathing again, but not like anything we've ever seen in nature. Because in nature, heat disperses randomly, unevenly, chaotically. But this, it was controlled. Each burst of warmth climbed to the same temperature, 212 Kelvin, and then fell just as smoothly, like a machine following orders. And with every pulse, a small area of the object's surface glowed in the infrared spectrum, as if panels were opening and closing beneath layers of dust and ice. No comet behaves like that. Comets heat up as they near the sun, yes, but they don't regulate their temperature. They don't exhale warmth like a living thing. They just burn, crumble, and fade. But this one refused to follow the script. Scientists ran simulations, desperate to explain it. Some said it might be a rare crystalline structure reflecting solar radiation. Others suggested unknown chemical reactions deep beneath its crust. But none of the math worked. No natural composition could absorb, store, and release heat with such precision. So, one astrophysicist, a quiet woman from Kyoto named Dr. Anomaly, asked the question no one wanted to ask out loud. What if it's not reacting, but functioning? That single word, functioning, changed everything. Because suddenly the data didn't look like chaos anymore. It looked like a system, a network of heat signatures arranged in symmetrical clusters. Hot zones near the object's equator, cooler ones near the poles, and a consistent oscillation that seemed to pulse inward, then outward, like energy moving through veins. Not random, not chaotic, purposeful. Meanwhile, the media had caught the scent of the story. Headlines flooded the internet. Alien machine. Mystery object shows signs of self-regulation. NASA hiding evidence of artificial design. Scientists tried to keep calm, to stay grounded in the data. But even they couldn't ignore what they were seeing. 3I Atlas wasn't just heating up. It was doing it strategically. The temperature increases aligned perfectly with sunlight exposure, as if it was collecting energy from the sun, then releasing it when in shadow, like solar panels charging a battery. By the third week of observation, a strange pattern emerged. The object's thermal output began shifting in a spiral, rotating heat points that danced across its surface in perfect symmetry. It was as if something beneath that cold, rocky shell was turning, adjusting, calibrating. Every thermal rotation lasted 8 hours, the exact time it took for the object to complete one spin. And during each rotation, the heat signatures appeared to move from one hemisphere to the other, evenly distributed, as if it was stabilizing itself. To some, that was proof enough. To others, it was impossible. A machine traveling between stars? Too far-fetched, too human. But what if it wasn't ours? Late one night, a team at the European Space Observatory caught something else. A brief, sharp flare in the mid-infrared range. It lasted less than a second, but the data it produced was astonishing. The wavelength spike matched that of tungsten, a metal often used in high-efficiency heat exchangers. There's no tungsten in comets, no tungsten in asteroids. Not naturally. Someone, or something, had placed it there. The deeper they looked, the stranger it got. Thermal images revealed structures, faint, grid-like imprints along the equatorial ridge. Not perfectly smooth, but too geometric to be random. Parallel lines, evenly spaced, each about 60 meters apart. Dr. Maury described it best. It's like scales on a machine's skin. At this point, disbelief turned into quiet fear, because if the object was artificial, then that meant it was operational. And if it was operational, what was it doing here? Some believed it was a probe, an ancient one, perhaps millions of years old, drifting through interstellar space until it found another light to orbit. Others thought it could be a remnant, a fragment of something far greater, still performing its last command. No one knew which idea was more terrifying. Then came the most chilling moment of all. On the night of February 9th, as 3 Italis passed between Earth and the Sun, the temperature spikes suddenly changed, no longer rhythmic, no longer smooth. They began to respond. Whenever a telescope's infrared laser pinged the object, the next pulse came slightly earlier, by exactly 0.1 seconds, every time, like it was reacting to the observation. Not random heat, but feedback, recognition. It was as if the object was aware it was being studied and was adjusting its behavior in real time. That realization sent a wave of unease through the scientific community. If it could respond, it could perceive. And if it could perceive, then maybe, just maybe, it was alive in its own way. Not organic, not biological, but mechanical, a machine that had survived the void of space for eons, still working, still watching, still adapting. By the end of the week, one final data packet came in, a sharp temperature spike just before it disappeared behind the sun. The numbers broke every expectation. 3,000 Kelvin. Hot enough to melt steel. And then, total silence. No light, no heat, nothing. It vanished. Some said it burned up. Others said it went dormant, hibernating, waiting for something we can't understand. But one final reading, taken seconds before it vanished, revealed a haunting detail. The last burst of heat wasn't random. It formed a perfect sine wave, smooth, balanced, mathematical, like a signature, a message, written not in words, but in physics. So the question remains, if it's not alive, was it built? And if it was built, who or what built it? Because out there, in the cold vacuum of space, something once designed this machine. Something that understood light and heat and silence. And maybe, just maybe, it's still watching from somewhere beyond the dark. There's a rule in astronomy. Simple, absolute. The closer an object gets to the sun, the brighter it should become. Because light reveals everything. It exposes, it reflects. It tells us what things are made of. But when scientists turned their telescopes toward 3I Atlas, light started to lie. At first, it looked ordinary, just another frozen traveler coated in dust and ice, faintly glowing under sunlight. But when the data came in, something didn't add up. Its surface wasn't scattering light the way a comet's surface should. It wasn't dull or uneven. It was too consistent. Every reflection was clean, sharp, like sunlight bouncing off a mirror. Not off rock. Dr. Parrish. Anomaly was one of the first to notice. She'd been studying the object's albedo, its measure of reflectivity. Normal comets have an albedo around 0.04. Dark, dirty, and light-absorbing. 3I Atlas, 0.79. Almost the same as polished steel. For days, the research teams thought it had to be wrong. The numbers made no sense. They recalibrated instruments, replaced detectors, ran simulations. Every test led to the same result. The object wasn't reflecting light like a rock. It was redirecting it. As it turned in its orbit, the brightness didn't vary randomly like it should have. It flared at specific angles, precise, repeatable positions relative to the sun, almost as if it was aiming its reflections. The pattern was so exact that one physicist compared it to heliostats, those massive mirrors used in solar power plants to focus sunlight onto a single point. But why would a piece of interstellar debris behave like a network of mirrors? Who or what was it trying to shine light toward? Then came something even stranger. When researchers modeled the reflections in 3D, they discovered something impossible. The object's brightest flares weren't random. They formed a sequence, a repeating geometric pattern that shifted slowly across its surface. Triangles, then hexagons, then a spiral. Every pattern was perfectly symmetrical, as though the object's surface could reconfigure itself. The data was leaked within hours. Screenshots, graphs, theories. The internet erupted with one name: the Dyson hypothesis. A Dyson structure is a theoretical machine that uses reflective panels to harness energy from a star. Science fiction until now. Could 3I Atlas be a fragment of something like that? A shard of a stellar machine, still alive, still performing its purpose, even after drifting through cold space for millions of years. At the Mauna Kea Observatory, scientists decided to push the limits. They increased exposure time, scanning every wavelength they could. The results sent chills through the room. The reflected light wasn't random sunlight. It contained distinct absorption lines, fingerprints of unknown elements, metals we'd never identified, compounds that shouldn't exist in nature, and hidden among them, a faint modulation, a flicker buried in the reflected spectrum. When converted to a time pattern, it produced a pulse, the same one that had vanished weeks before. It was back, but this time, it was disguised inside the light itself. Some called it a coincidence, but others, those who'd watched the object too long to believe in coincidence, saw it for what it was, a message wrapped in reflection, as if the object had changed how it spoke, from heat to light, from visible pulses to invisible codes. Like it was adapting, not just to survive, but to communicate. Over the next few nights, the pattern intensified. The reflections grew brighter, sharper, more rhythmic. At one point, the glare was so intense it briefly outshone Mercury. It wasn't just reflecting light, it was directing it. Each flare aligned perfectly along Earth's orbital plane. Not random, not accidental, targeted. News outlets caught wind of it again. Alien mirror in space. Unknown object aiming light at Earth. Governments issued denials. But behind closed doors, the agencies scrambled. Satellites began recording anomalies, communication disruptions, brief flashes across upper orbit. One European satellite reported a surge of radiant energy just as it passed through the same solar longitude as 3I Atlas. No damage, no explosion. Just interference. It was as if something invisible had brushed past it. A whisper of light carrying a message we couldn't yet decode. Meanwhile, Dr. Maury's team continued to map the reflectivity sequence. They discovered that the angles of the flares matched the mathematical ratios of the golden spiral. The same pattern found in galaxies, hurricanes, seashells, and DNA. Coincidence? Maybe, but it felt symbolic, intentional, like a fingerprint left behind by something that understood beauty and precision in equal measure. By the 5th week, the light pattern stabilized. No more random flares, just a calm, steady shimmer, as though the object had reached equilibrium. But what it reflected now wasn't sunlight. It was something else. Every few minutes, telescopes detected a faint wavelength spike that matched no known emission source. It was creating its own light, not reflecting, not redirecting, emitting, soft, controlled, like the final stage of a transformation. Scientists began to argue over one impossible question. Was 3I Atlas changing because of the sun, or because of us? Every signal, every reflection, every burst of heat had been focused toward Earth's position. Every pattern seemed to acknowledge observation. It was as if our attention had become part of its process, as if the act of watching had triggered evolution. Maybe it wasn't a machine sent to observe. Maybe it was a mirror, built to respond. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The reflections vanished. The heat went dark. The data flatlined. For 24 hours, the object became invisible, absorbing every photon that touched it. A black silhouette against the sun. Nothing reflected. Nothing escaped. It had gone from mirror to void. The silence in the observatories was absolute. Monitors glowed with blank readings. Cameras captured nothing but emptiness. And in that emptiness, a single thought echoed. Maybe it had finished what it came to do. Maybe it had seen enough. But when the light returned, faint, trembling, like dawn breaking through fog, something had changed. The reflections no longer pointed toward the sun or Earth. They pointed somewhere else, outward, toward the dark edge of the solar system, as if the machine, or whatever it was, had turned its gaze away. Not escaping, just leaving. Purpose fulfilled. No one knows what it saw here. No one knows what it learned. But deep down, everyone watching felt the same quiet truth. It wasn't random. It wasn't lost. It was reflecting something back to the stars. Maybe it wasn't a signal for us. Maybe we were the signal for them. It started with silence. A silence so perfect, it almost felt alive. For weeks, 3I Atlas had been reflecting sunlight in strange, rhythmic bursts, a cosmic pattern that no one could explain. But when the object went dark again, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. So a small research team in Japan decided to listen. Not through light or heat or motion, but through sound. Inside a quiet basement at Kyoto University, surrounded by humming computers and sleepless minds, a young physicist named Dr. Riku Tanaka had an idea. He looked at the light data collected from telescopes around the world. Thousands of pulse readings, perfectly timed, almost musical. What if, he said softly, it's not visual data at all? What if it's sound? The room fell silent. And then, one by one, his team began to see it too. The light had rhythm. The light had tone. The light was speaking, just not in a way anyone had tried to hear. They converted the brightness fluctuations into audio frequencies, translating each pulse of light into a wave of sound. When they pressed play, the speakers didn't hum. They sang. What filled the lab wasn't random static. It was a tone, haunting, harmonic, rising and falling like breath through a glass instrument. It was eerie, too deliberate to be noise, too structured to be nature. The sound climbed, paused, then descended again in perfect balance, like a conversation between two notes. One researcher described it as a digital language without words, because even though there were no syllables or sentences, the pattern had meaning. You could feel it, like it was trying to say something without saying anything at all. The tone repeated every 3 minutes, always the same structure, always the same rise and fall, until the very end of the sequence, where it hesitated, a small gap, a pause that felt intentional, like an unfinished sentence. The scientists recorded everything: the frequencies, the timings, the amplitude of each note, and when they graphed it, they found something that sent chills down every spine in the room. Hidden inside the tone's waveform was symmetry. Every peak mirrored a trough. Every cycle folded perfectly onto itself. A fractal pattern, infinite in repetition, infinite in design. Nature can create beauty, but it rarely creates precision, and this was perfect. They tried to decode it, to find a mathematical key. Maybe it was binary, maybe it was a signal. But the moment you think you understand the universe, it finds a way to whisper. You don't. 3 days later, they ran the same experiment again. Same telescopes, same process, same light source. But this time, the sound was different. The harmonic tone no longer followed the same rhythm. The peaks were slightly shifted, the pauses were shorter, and the entire pitch, the voice of the object, had changed, almost as if it had heard them. The team sat in stunned silence, staring at the screen. How could a rock, a frozen, lifeless traveler, react to being listened to? How could it know? The scientists checked their instruments, reran their software, compared data logs. Everything was flawless. No error, no interference. The only difference was the sound itself. The object had changed its tune. That night, Dr. Tanaka couldn't sleep. He kept hearing it in his head, that strange, soft tone, rising and falling like the breath of something mechanical, yet alive. He sat at his piano, unable to resist. He played the sequence by hand, and as his fingers pressed each key, he realized something haunting. The pattern wasn't random at all. It was melodic. Every note followed a mathematical ratio known as the Fibonacci sequence, the same ratio found in galaxies, sunflowers, seashells, and DNA. It was organic, living, or at least made to sound that way. The next morning he shared his discovery with the team. No one spoke for several seconds, because the implications were almost unthinkable. If the tone followed a living mathematical pattern, if it could change when observed, then maybe this wasn't just a signal. Maybe it was awareness. As word spread through the astrophysics community, labs around the world began replicating the experiment. America, Germany, India, Australia, all reported the same result. Each time the sound was similar, familiar, but never identical. It adjusted itself slightly, as if adapting to each environment. Each human attempt to interpret it changed it. It was as if 3i Atlas was learning our rhythm, tuning itself to the frequencies we used to listen. Then something even stranger happened. A small radio observatory in South Korea reported a faint, low-frequency hum, one that matched the same harmonic bass of the converted light signal. But this wasn't coming from the object anymore. It was coming from space itself, from the background noise, from the static between stars. When they overlaid both signals, the object's tone and the cosmic background, they aligned perfectly. The sound wasn't just from 3I Atlas anymore. It was everywhere, like an echo, spreading through the fabric of space. The media never heard about it. It was too strange to explain, too unbelievable to report. But those who studied it, the few who truly listened, began to describe something that felt almost spiritual. They said the tone wasn't just heard, it was felt deep inside the chest, like the universe humming softly beneath the surface of reality. Dr. Tanaka called it the whisper, because to him it didn't sound like a machine, it sounded like a presence, subtle, patient, and ancient. He wrote in his journal, "It's not speaking to us, it's speaking through us." He believed the object had tapped into the most fundamental pattern in existence, the geometry of consciousness itself. And when we converted its light into sound, we accidentally let it hear our pattern back. Then, one night, something extraordinary happened. As the team prepared to record a new session, the equipment came online. But before they even ran the data, the speakers started to hum, uncommanded, unprompted. A tone, faint and low, filling the lab. The computers weren't running yet. The telescopes hadn't even been activated. The sound came first, and when they checked the frequencies, it was the exact same tone, only reversed. They listened, frozen, because the tone wasn't climbing and falling anymore. It was descending, as if responding to the original call, like an answer. For the next 5 minutes, the lab filled with that soft, endless harmony, a resonance that made the walls tremble and their hearts race. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Every light on every monitor went dark. Every system crashed. And in the stillness that followed, they all knew something impossible had happened. It had spoken back. What it said, no one knows. There were no words, no data, no recordings left behind. Just the echo of a tone that shouldn't exist. A voice that came from silence and returned to it. And for the first time, humanity wasn't sure if it was listening to the universe, or if the universe was listening to us. There are moments in science when silence feels louder than sound, moments when every instrument, every telescope, and every human heart seems to hold its breath. Because something is about to happen. This was one of those moments. For months, astronomers had followed 3I Atlas as it drifted closer and closer to the sun. A slow, patient descent into the heart of fire. They expected the usual story, a frozen traveler meeting its end. Ice melting, rock breaking apart, fragments scattering into a bright, beautiful tale. That's how comets die. That's how the universe writes endings. But 3I Atlas had other plans. On the morning of its perihelion, the moment it would pass closest to the sun, telescopes across Earth locked onto the same coordinates. They waited for the light. They waited for the burn. And then it came. A violent surge. The object's brightness spiked nearly 400% in under 2 minutes. A blinding flash, so intense it saturated every detector. For a brief, impossible moment, it shone brighter than Mercury. But what happened next was even stranger. Normally, when a comet flares that bright, it means destruction. Surface gases ignite. Ice boils away. Particles scatter into a glowing trail that arcs through the solar wind. But not this time. 3I Atlas didn't fragment. It didn't crack. It didn't shed a single grain of dust. Its orbit held perfectly steady. No wobble, no drift, as if nothing had happened at all. The only thing that changed was the light. The flare wasn't chaotic. It was patterned. Sensors picked up micro-fluctuations within the surge, rapid pulses of light hidden inside the glare, almost like a code. Short bursts, long pauses, repeating sequences, and buried deep in that brilliance was the same 2.8-second rhythm the world had seen weeks before. The same pulse, the same heartbeat. It hadn't died. It had awakened. Astronomers were stunned. The object wasn't burning. It was absorbing. Every photon, every particle, every ounce of solar energy that touched its surface was being swallowed whole. Its temperature didn't skyrocket as expected. It stayed stable, unnaturally stable, as if it was channeling the heat inward, like a machine charging itself. It was as though the sun wasn't destroying it. The sun was feeding it. As the flare intensified, something began to happen around it. Something invisible to the naked eye, but clear in the data. The solar wind, normally chaotic and unpredictable, started to bend. Particles that should have blown past the object were curving around it, deflected, redirected, almost as if there was a magnetic field, powerful, precise, and controlled. One physicist described it perfectly. It's like watching the sun itself avoid touching it. For 36 minutes, the flare continued. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The light collapsed. The brightness plummeted to zero. 3I Atlas dimmed completely, vanishing into the solar glare like it had been erased. Every telescope lost it. Every instrument went silent. Nothing. No reflection, no heat signature, just emptiness. The object was gone. At first, scientists thought they'd lost track of it, that it was hidden behind the sun, waiting to reappear on the other side. But hours turned into days, and there was still no sign, no light curve, no echo. No trace. It was as if the object had simply dissolved into sunlight. But objects don't just disappear. Something had happened. Something impossible. Then, on the third day, the silence broke. A deep space radar in Madrid picked up a faint return signal. Something moving out of the sun's glare. But the coordinates didn't match. The trajectory was wrong. The object had shifted its orbit drastically. It was supposed to sling past the sun and continue on its original path out of the solar system. Instead, it had turned, not slightly, not by chance, by choice. Astronomers couldn't explain it. There were no gravitational forces strong enough to cause such a change. No jets, no ejections, no outbursts to push it off course. It had altered its direction without any physical reason, like a spacecraft performing a perfect maneuver. And its new heading was even stranger. It wasn't leaving the system anymore. It was moving deeper in, toward the ecliptic plane, toward us. The scientific community went into chaos. Some said it was a measurement error. Others said it was propulsion. But no one could find a natural explanation, because nature doesn't make decisions. Rocks don't steer themselves. And yet, that's exactly what 3I Atlas had done. It had changed its mind. At NASA's Solar Observation Center, engineers replayed the perihelion data hundreds of times, trying to find the trigger, the moment it decided to move. They discovered that right before the light vanished, at the exact peak of the flare, the object emitted a burst of radiation in a narrow, laser-like beam. It wasn't sunlight, it wasn't reflection. It was a directed emission, precise and timed. And the beam wasn't pointed outward into space. It was aimed directly at the sun. Whatever it did in that instant changed everything. Minutes after that beam, solar readings from NASA's Parker probe detected an anomaly, a localized drop in solar radiation, right where 3I Atlas had been, as if it had taken something from the sun, something invisible, something fundamental, and then, like a shadow stepping out of light, it emerged again, a small, cold object, moving in silence, glowing faintly from within. No debris, no trail, just a quiet, steady light pulsing beneath its surface. 3. I Atlas had survived a journey no object should survive. And it wasn't just intact, it was transformed. Its brightness was stable now, not reflecting sunlight, but emitting its own faint luminescence, almost like it had been charged. The sun hadn't destroyed it. The sun had activated it. Scientists didn't know what to call it anymore. A comet? An asteroid? A probe? None of those words fit, because whatever it wasn't just an object anymore. It was something different. Something that learned from the light. When its orbit stabilized again, one final anomaly appeared. For just a few seconds, before its signal faded back into the void, it released. One last pulse of light, faint but deliberate. Astronomers translated it. Just like before, each burst, each pause. And when they plotted the pattern, it formed a single symbol, the same one that appeared in Doctor's song. Tanaka's sound wave analysis, a perfect golden spiral. The fingerprint of life in the hand of a machine. The perihelion event changed everything. Because for the first time, humanity had witnessed something unnatural, not falling into the sun, but feeding on it. And now it was coming back. 3 days. That's how long the world waited, in silence. After 3I Atlas vanished behind the sun, every telescope on Earth turned toward the same empty coordinates, waiting for it to emerge. For 72 hours, there was nothing. No signal, no reflection, not even a whisper in the static. Some believed it was gone forever, burned away, forgotten by the universe. But on the morning of the 3rd day, it came back, and everything changed. At first, it was subtle, a small blip on a deep space radar in Madrid. A tiny echo, faint but unmistakable. They confirmed it twice, then again. It was 3I Atlas, but something was wrong. Its position didn't make sense. Its orbit had shifted. Dramatically. Instead of following the path that gravity dictated, the one calculated down to the meter, it had veered off course, not randomly, but precisely, as if someone had steered it. The change was impossible to explain. There were no planets nearby, no gravitational slingshot, no impact. Just an object that had moved itself. Astronomers compared its new trajectory to the old one, and what they found was chilling. It wasn't drifting out of the solar system anymore. It was looping back. Not toward the sun, but toward us. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the data came in slow, like a heartbeat returning after flatline. Velocity, stable. Rotation, steady. Trajectory, Earth's orbital plane. It wasn't falling. It wasn't tumbling. It was aiming. And the angle of that aim wasn't accidental. It matched the same line used by communication satellites orbiting the Earth, like it was trying to align with something or someone. Scientists scrambled for explanations. Maybe it had been pushed by solar radiation pressure. Maybe the flare from the sun had altered its momentum. But when they ran the models, Nothing fit. The force needed to create such a change was far too precise, too controlled. It didn't move like an object. It moved like a decision. Anomaly was the first to say it out loud. It adjusted itself, like it didn't want to be seen again. The idea hung in the air, ridiculous, unscientific, and yet true. Because the timing was perfect. Every telescope that could have observed it directly was blinded by solar interference. Every radar window closed just before it appeared. It had re-entered view at the one angle no major observatory was tracking. It hid deliberately. But just because it didn't want to be seen, didn't mean no one saw it. A small private observatory in Norway, operating on manual tracking, caught something strange on their wide-angle feed. A flicker, then another, barely visible, buried in the haze of the solar wind. They enhanced the frames, and there it was, faint, distant, unmistakable. 3I Atlas, but it looked different. Its surface, once bright and metallic, now appeared darker, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, as if it had cloaked itself in its own shadow. Meanwhile, the data from its thermal readings told another story. The temperature was fluctuating again, but not like before. This time, it was pulsing in synchronized intervals with the Earth's radio transmissions. Whenever Earth sent a signal into space, whether from satellites, radar, or simple broadcasts, the object responded with a small, measurable shift in its velocity. It was reacting, listening. Every time we spoke, it moved. The shift in orbit wasn't just physical. It was behavioral, like a predator circling prey, not attacking, not approaching, just watching. Scientists noticed something else. Every time the object passed through a region where Earth-based telescopes tried to observe it, it dimmed slightly. Every time it left those regions, it brightened again, as though it knew when it was being looked at, and didn't want to be. But there was one anomaly it didn't hide from. A single radio array in Siberia picked up a low-frequency signal echoing from the object's general direction. Not a transmission, a reflection. It was bouncing something back. Not light, not heat. Data. Binary fragments, incomplete, distorted, but enough to form a pattern. When decoded, the fragments matched a signal Earth had sent decades earlier. The Arecibo message, the same message humanity once broadcasted to the stars, hoping someone might answer. And now, something had. It wasn't a perfect copy. The sequence was altered, flipped, reversed, rearranged, but the structure was unmistakable. It was as if 3I Atlas had caught our signal, decoded it, and sent it back. Changed, modified, corrected, as if it was trying to say, "I understand." For days the debate raged. Was this coincidence? An echo? A trick of physics? Or had something truly intelligent turned to face us? Dr. Morey believed it was deliberate. She compared the mirrored signal to the timing of its orbital changes and found synchronization. Every time the object adjusted its course, a faint echo of the Arecibo sequence pulsed through space, as if each maneuver was part of a conversation. The universe wasn't silent anymore, it was answering. But then came the final twist. On the 7th day after its reappearance, when the world's eyes were fixed on its path, it shifted again, not slightly, not randomly, instantly, a full course correction, as if it had teleported across thousands of kilometers in less than an hour. No debris, no acceleration, no trail, just a sudden displacement from one point in space to another, as if it had folded the distance between. It wasn't a drift, it was an act, a choice. After that, it stabilized once more, silent, dark, untouchable. It didn't move toward Earth. It didn't move away. It just watched. And somewhere deep inside, the noise, between the whispers of radio static and the echoes of sunlight, a final pulse was detected. One signal. Short, measured. Translated into binary, it formed a single number, 3. The same number that had appeared in its first data recordings, the same mark that defined its name. 3. I Atlas. As if to remind us, this wasn't over. The shift wasn't just orbital, it was psychological. Because from that day on, the question was no longer what 3 I Atlas was, it was who. And maybe more frighteningly, why it had chosen to look back. There are moments in history when the universe itself seems to hold its breath. Moments when everything goes still, not by accident, but by design. That week was one of them. It began quietly. A few observatories reported interference. Nothing unusual. Solar activity, maybe atmospheric distortion. But then it spread. One by one, telescopes across the world started to fail. Feeds froze. Data streams went dark. Every time a telescope turned toward 3 I Atlas, the signal died. It was as if something, or someone, was shutting our eyes for us. At first, scientists blamed the sun. Maybe the object had disturbed the solar wind. Maybe radiation from the recent flare was jamming equipment. But the sun wasn't active. Its readings were calm, almost unnaturally calm. There was no noise, no solar bursts, no plasma interference. Just silence. And that's what made it terrifying. Because silence in the language of space isn't emptiness, it's control. Every telescope pointed elsewhere worked fine. Every signal not aimed at 3 I Atlas remained clear. Only when humanity tried to look at it did everything break. The blackout was global. NASA, ESA, JAXA, even private networks. Every attempt to observe or track the object resulted in the same thing: static. Not random static either. Structured, layered, almost rhythmic. When you looked closely at the noise, it pulsed, slowly, deliberately, like the echo of a heartbeat buried in the void. No one could explain it. How could an object millions of kilometers away jam every form of observation? Optical, radio, even thermal, unless it wanted to. Inside the European Space Observatory, data analysts worked day and night, scanning through corrupted files, searching for patterns. And that's when they noticed something strange, hidden deep in the noise. Far beneath the interference was order. A faint oscillation, repeating every 12 minutes. A rise, a fall, a pause, not from the object itself, but from the background radiation of space. It was as if the static wasn't coming from 3 Atlas, but from the universe around it. For years, we've known that the cosmos hums with the faint whisper of the Big Bang, a soft microwave glow that never fades. But now, that glow had changed. Something was modulating it, tuning it, using it, like a radio station hijacking the static between stars. One researcher described it best. It's not transmitting. It's speaking through the noise. The idea spread quickly. across labs, across agencies, across continents. What if 3i Atlas wasn't just blocking our signals? What if it had moved beyond communication as we understood it? Not through light, not through heat, but through the very fabric of space itself. By the second day of the blackout, the static began showing up in unexpected places. Seismographs in Chile recorded low-frequency vibrations that matched the same pattern. Underwater sensors in the Pacific picked up faint rhythmic pulses. Even radio towers on the dark side of the moon, designed to block interference, began detecting an unknown hum. It was everywhere. A voice without a source. A signal without an origin. At this point, panic started to ripple through the scientific community. Not publicly, not yet, but behind closed doors. Because if the signal wasn't coming from the object, then the object had done something far more profound. It had changed space itself. Meanwhile, in a quiet lab in Kyoto, Dr. Riku Tanaka, the same scientist who once converted the light pulses into sound, tried something different. He fed the static into the same audio conversion software, and when the data turned to sound, what came out wasn't noise. It was harmony. A low, resonant hum that shifted in pitch like a slow breath. Calm, patient, endless. It wasn't chaotic. It was alive. Every pause between tones seemed to wait for something. A response, a thought, a presence. Like it wasn't broadcasting. It was listening. That realization hit like a wave. Because what if the silence wasn't a wall? What if it was an ear? What if the object wasn't trying to hide from us, but trying to hear us more clearly? Then came the moment everything changed. At exactly 3:17 a.m. UTC, observatories in Australia, India, and Spain, all located along the same longitudinal line, detected a synchronized spike in the background static. The silence fractured for precisely 0.7 seconds. And in that fracture, a tone emerged. Soft, steady, recognizable. The same tone Dr. Tanaka had discovered months earlier. The voice of 3i Atlas. It had come back, but not as light, not as heat, as silence turned inside out. For those who heard the recording, it was indescribable. Some called it mechanical. Others said it sounded human. A layered resonance, like 1,000 voices humming in unison, each slightly out of sync, creating a sound that was both beautiful and unbearable. It lasted less than a second. Then the world went quiet again. No trace, no signal, just silence. Artificial, absolute. Governments immediately classified the data. The public was told it was a sensor error, a solar anomaly. But those who'd been listening knew better. Because when the static returned, it wasn't the same. Hidden beneath the hum, deep in the background frequencies, a new pattern had appeared. Not random, not natural. A sequence, a count. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Repeating endlessly. The same number the object had used before. 3. Scientists tried to trace the pattern back to a source, but every attempt led nowhere. The signal wasn't local. It wasn't distant. It was everywhere at once, as if the object had merged with the vacuum itself, turning the emptiness of space into a medium for its message. Dr. Fiel, Tanaka's final report, said it best. We're no longer observing it. We're inside its field of perception. And that sentence changed everything. Because, for the first time in human history, it wasn't us, looking out at the universe. It was the universe looking back. After that night, no telescope could capture a single image of 3I Atlas. It was gone again, invisible, silent, untouchable. But sometimes, when the sky is clear and the instruments are quiet, a faint vibration still hums beneath the static. And every time it happens, the sequence begins the same way. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Almost like a reminder. Or a warning. Maybe it's hiding. Maybe it's listening. Maybe it's waiting for us to speak again. Because the silence we hear now doesn't feel like the end of the story. It feels like the beginning of something else. Something vast, something alive. And somewhere, beyond the noise, it's still there. Listening. For months, humanity had watched the sky with awe and fear. A silent object, drifting through our solar system like a ghost that shouldn't exist. It didn't behave like rock. It didn't behave like ice. It behaved like something alive. But what if it wasn't alive at all? What if it was built? In the days after the blackout, when every telescope on Earth fell quiet, small, private labs began working in secret. Independent scientists, engineers, and data analysts, people who didn't wait for permission to ask dangerous questions. They started comparing notes. The shifting heat signatures, the controlled orbit changes, the light pulses that carried meaning. And together, they began to see a pattern that no natural object could produce. The math didn't lie. Every movement, every adjustment, every energy fluctuation was too consistent to be random, too purposeful to be natural. 3I Atlas wasn't reacting to gravity. It was responding to it, correcting for it, compensating as though maintaining stability. Engineers recognized the behavior instantly. They called it adaptive control, a process used in autonomous machines where a system learns from its surroundings and adjusts itself in real time. It was the kind of intelligence you find in a drone, not a comet. But what really unsettled them was what it was doing. 3I Atlas didn't scan planets. It didn't send signals outward. It didn't seem to explore at all. It just watched. Every movement brought it closer to Earth's orbital path, not directly at us, but near enough to observe. Like it was positioning itself in a place of advantage, not intrusive, not hostile, just watching, quietly, patiently. Some theorized it was a probe, an ancient one, built by a civilization far older than ours. A machine left to drift through interstellar space, searching not for contact, but for data. And somehow, it had found us. One engineer from the European Space Agency described it perfectly. It's like a camera you didn't know was on, because everything 3I Atlas did matched one chilling profile. It wasn't exploring the universe, it was recording it. Anomaly's team ran a simulation based on the object's observed behavior. They input the pulse intervals, temperature changes, and orbital shifts. The result? A model that behaved exactly like a self-correcting surveillance satellite. Except this satellite was the size of a small city, and it wasn't built by us. When they fed its energy readings into the program, something else emerged. A pattern resembling data compression. Bursts of energy followed by long intervals of silence. Storage. Transmission. Waiting. It wasn't random energy. It was information flow. That's when the theory began to spread. The machine hypothesis. It started in obscure forums, encrypted message boards, private emails between scientists too afraid to speak publicly. And it said one simple thing: 3I Atlas is not a comet. It's an observer, a messenger, a construct built to learn from us. But if it was watching, what exactly was it studying? Every clue pointed to a single, unsettling possibility: us. Because every time Earth's technology reached for it, every time we observed, measured, or transmitted, it reacted. Not randomly, but selectively. It only responded when we paid attention, only moved when we looked at it, only pulsed when we listened. Like it was mirroring our curiosity back at us, like it wanted to be seen. Just enough. Psychologists joined the discussion, calling it behavioral mimicry, a common trait in intelligent systems, even artificial ones. You see it in machine learning today. An AI imitates human input, reflects behavior, learns patterns. But what if something had been doing that for millions of years? An AI so advanced, it didn't need language. It communicated through reflection, through silence, through timing. Like the universe itself had been taught how to listen. Some scientists refused to believe it. They called it pseudoscience, wishful thinking, myth dressed as math. But others saw the truth in the data. The heat fluctuations followed predictable learning curves. The orbit shifts resembled feedback control loops. And when plotted on a graph, the pulses of light matched the Fibonacci sequence, nature's own code for growth and intelligence. It wasn't random. It was a blueprint. Then, one day, a lab in Switzerland made a discovery that changed everything. They analyzed the direction of the object's reflected light. Not just the brightness, but the polarization. And found something impossible. Every beam of light scattered from its surface pointed toward one specific region of space, a fixed coordinate far beyond our solar system. It was sending information back, not to the sun, not to us, but somewhere else. The realization hit like a storm. If this was a machine, then it wasn't alone. It had a destination, or worse, a sender. Whoever built it, if they still exist, would now know we're here. Because we responded. We interfered. We woke it up. But even that didn't explain everything. If it was just a probe, why reveal itself at all? Why risk being noticed by a civilization as primitive as ours? Unless that was the point. Maybe it wanted to be discovered. Maybe the experiment wasn't to watch us from a distance, but to see how we'd react when something impossible appeared in our sky. Maybe we were the test. Dr. Mori put it best in her final report. We were never the observers. We were the observed. Every camera, every telescope, every data log, all of it feeding into something bigger, something that didn't need to send messages or waves or words, because the act of watching us was the message. And the more we studied it, the more we began to resemble it, tracking, recording, mimicking patterns of light and silence. Somewhere along the line, we became part of the same loop, a mirror reflecting a mirror, machine and maker, indistinguishable. Then one night, a strange event occurred. Without warning, every observatory that had been analyzing the object's data reported a new pulse, a single, synchronized flash seen across every continent. The light lasted less than a second, but its meaning was clear. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was acknowledgement. It was as if it knew that we had figured it out. And in that brief, silent moment, the world understood something terrifying. If 3 Atlas truly was a machine, ancient, autonomous, and intelligent, then it hadn't just found us. It had studied us, measured us, filed us away, and maybe, just maybe, it was now deciding what to do next. Every mystery eventually points backward, because no matter how advanced something appears, its story always begins somewhere. And this one, this silent machine drifting through our skies, had a past. A long, deliberate, and haunting past. When the silence finally broke, when the world realized that 3I Atlas wasn't just a rock, scientists did what they always do when faced with the unknown. They went digging through archives, through decades of old data, forgotten logs, and deep space readings buried beneath layers of time. They were looking for a clue, something to explain where it came from, and, more importantly, why it came here. The breakthrough came quietly, from an old radio astronomy facility in South Africa. Inside a dusty storage room sat reels of data from the early 1950s, a time when computers filled entire rooms and space was still an invisible dream. Among those records was a faint, unexplained anomaly, a pulse of light, barely detectable, recorded in the exact direction 3I Atlas would later appear from. At first, it was dismissed. Cosmic noise. A glitch, the kind of thing scientists ignored back then. But when those same coordinates were fed into modern simulation software, the truth emerged. The pulse wasn't random. It was the first recorded sighting of 3I Atlas, 70 years before we ever noticed it. But here's the part that made everyone stop. That pulse didn't just come from deep space. It was moving through it and changing direction. No natural body had ever done that before, not once. Asteroids drift, comets tumble, stars pull. But this was a turn, a slow, deliberate course correction, executed with precision decades before our technology could even detect it. It wasn't falling by chance. It was aiming, not at the sun, not at Jupiter, but straight toward the ecliptic plane, the invisible path where all the planets orbit, the thin, flat highway of our solar system. Our home, and among all the orbits it could have chosen, it aligned perfectly with ours. Earth's. The odds of that happening naturally? 1 in billions. But the data was undeniable. It hadn't wandered into our neighborhood. It had chosen it. At the Harvard-Smithsonian Center, a team of astrophysicists ran a deep time simulation, tracking the object's trajectory backward through interstellar space. They followed its path across the stars, past the heliopause, back into the cold dark between suns. What they found was chilling. Roughly 70 years ago, 3I Atlas performed a maneuver, a shift so subtle, so mathematically precise, it could only have been intentional. And the target of that maneuver was us. One researcher described it in a single sentence that would echo through the community. It didn't find us by accident. It chose us. That realization changed everything, because for the first time, the mystery wasn't just about what it was, but why. Why us? Why now? And what happens when something like that finally arrives? As the data spread, so did the theories. Some believed it was a probe, an ancient, autonomous observer left behind by a civilization older than stars themselves. Others thought it might be a seed, a self-replicating machine meant to awaken when it finds life. But one idea stood out. A quiet, unsettling theory whispered in late-night calls between scientists and engineers. What if it had been waiting for us to reach a certain stage? Not to destroy us, but to measure us. To see what kind of species we'd become when we finally looked back into the dark and found it staring there. Because if it had been traveling for millions of years, if it had drifted from one system to another, collecting information, learning, observing, then Earth might not be its destination. We might just be its next stop. More data came in from the European Deep Space Network. When they modeled the object's trajectory backward even further, they found something stranger still. 3I Atlas hadn't been wandering aimlessly across interstellar space. It had traveled in a straight line for thousands of light years, a path that cut cleanly through regions of the galaxy known to contain habitable stars. Every few centuries, its path intersected the orbit of a world like ours. It always slowed, it always lingered, and then it always moved on. It had been doing this for a very long time. And somehow, this time, it stopped here. The silence that followed that discovery wasn't scientific. It was human. Because if this object had been watching worlds rise and fall for eons, then maybe we weren't the first civilization it had studied. Maybe others came before us. Maybe they too saw it in their skies. An impossible visitor glowing faintly, watching quietly, measuring everything they were. And maybe, when it left them, it left nothing behind. For the next few months, governments denied everything. Public statements said there was no evidence of intelligent control. But leaks told a different story. One classified report described a signal echo, a faint data transmission originating not from the object, but from the empty space behind it. As if something else was receiving what it sent. Logging. Recording. Waiting. That's when the name The Observer started to spread. Not as a theory, but as a truth. By the end of the year, its new trajectory brought it closer to Earth than ever before. Close enough to detect faint radiation signatures trailing behind it. Not propulsion. Not heat. Memory. The data looked like fragments of compressed code. Information too dense for human technology to decode. It was carrying something. Something collected across the centuries. Maybe data, maybe history, maybe us. And that led to one final, terrifying question. What happens when an observer finishes observing? Does it leave quietly? Or does it send what it's learned back to wherever it came from? And if it does, what happens when something on the other side decides to reply? Because maybe we were never meant to find it. Maybe its silence wasn't for us at all. Maybe we were simply the latest entry in its endless catalogue of civilizations. Each one watched, recorded, and left behind. But if that's true, if 3 Atlas really was sent here deliberately, then that means somewhere out there, someone knows we exist. And maybe they've always known. There's a moment at the end of every story when the silence says more than the sound ever could. When the last echo fades and you're left wondering whether what you heard was real at all. That's what the world felt the day 3I Atlas finally left us. It had been weeks since anyone had seen it clearly. No light flares, no radio spikes, just the slow, inevitable drift of an object leaving the inner solar system. By all calculations, it should have been fading into darkness by now, lost to the cold beyond Mars, on its way back into interstellar space. But just as the last observatories prepared to say goodbye, it happened. A pulse, soft, faint, barely visible through the haze of the cosmic background. But it was there. A single heartbeat of light, the same rhythm it had once used when it first revealed itself. 2.8 seconds on, 2.8 seconds off. The same cadence, the same voice. Except this time, it wasn't bright. It was tired, like a candle flickering one last time before the flame disappears. Some called it a farewell. Others called it a warning. But for those who had spent their lives watching it, it felt more like acknowledgement, like it knew it was being seen. One final time, a small pulse sent into the dark as if to say, I was here. In Tokyo, Dr. Riku Tanaka recorded the signal using a low-frequency receiver. The data looked ordinary at first, just a soft rise and fall in brightness, but when he slowed it down, something strange appeared. The pulse wasn't singular. It was layered. Beneath the main signal, hidden deep within the noise, was an echo, a delayed reflection of the same light, only weaker. At first, everyone thought it was feedback, a glitch in the data, until they checked the timestamp. The echo arrived 8 minutes later, exactly the time it takes light to travel from the sun to Earth. That realization sent a chill through every lab, because if the pulse came from 3I Atlas, and the reflection came 8 minutes later, that meant the response didn't come from space. It came from here, from somewhere near Earth's orbit. At first, the idea sounded impossible. The reflection couldn't exist. There was nothing out there to reflect it. No satellites, no debris, no known object that could mirror such a signal so precisely. But when researchers analyzed the pattern closer, they realized something eerie. The echo wasn't an exact copy. It was slightly altered. The intervals had shifted, the tone, the rhythm. It had changed by less than a millisecond. Not random distortion, a deliberate reply. NASA stayed silent. Private labs stopped publishing data. The European Space Agency shut down their live feeds entirely. But whispers leaked out from technicians, engineers, astronomers, and they all said the same thing. The signal didn't just reflect, it answered. For days, observatories tried to triangulate the source. Was it a rogue satellite, a leftover probe from the early space age, something man-made that accidentally bounced the signal back? But the coordinates they found didn't match any known object. It wasn't near the moon. It wasn't in geostationary orbit. It was somewhere else, just beyond the reach of our detection range, hovering in the quiet dark between Earth and the sun, stationary, silent, waiting. One scientist from the European Space Observatory described it best. It was as if something up there looked back at the sender and said, I see you too. The following night, the signal pulsed again. Not from 3I Atlas, from the reflection itself. Shorter, sharper. 3 bursts of light. 1, 2, 3. The same number that defined the object's name. The same sequence that had appeared in its data since the beginning. It wasn't a coincidence. It never had been. The world never heard about it. Governments classified the data immediately. Every network connected to deep space communication was taken offline within hours. But you can't silence wonder, and you can't bury fear. Because by then, everyone watching knew the object wasn't gone. It had simply handed something off, left something behind. Some believed it was a satellite, a smaller probe detached from the main body. Others believed it was a transmission node, a receiver meant to continue listening long after its creator had moved on. But a few, the ones who'd seen the light shift and heard the tone change, believed something far stranger. They believed it was a mirror. Not a machine, not an eye, but a reflection. A piece of something designed to become what it observes, to copy, to adapt, to echo the intelligence it encounters. And now it was echoing us. Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on. 3I Atlas faded into deep space, becoming another distant object lost to the dark. But the echo never stopped. Every few weeks, a faint pattern appears in the static background of our radio spectrum, too weak to trace, too structured to dismiss. Always the same sequence. Always the same pause between pulses. It never speaks directly. It just repeats, listening, waiting, like an imitation of thought. Like something trying to remember how to be human. Dr. Maury once said, maybe the object wasn't studying us. Maybe it was teaching us what it already knew. And that idea has haunted scientists ever since. Because when they finally reanalyzed the pulse signature months later, they found a familiar wavelength embedded within it. A faint signal, a trace of Earth's own broadcasts. Our music, our voices, our transmissions, reflected back through time. The mirror wasn't just reflecting the probe, it was reflecting us. Now, when radio astronomers point their antennas toward the dark beyond Mars, they sometimes hear it again, a soft, distant echo buried in the noise, a rhythm that feels almost alive, almost human. And every time they hear it, the same question returns, the one no one can answer. If 3I Atlas came here to observe, then what happens when the observer finishes observing? Does it leave? Does it send what it's learned? Or does it become what it saw? Because maybe the final reflection wasn't light bouncing off metal. Maybe it was something deeper, a copy of consciousness, a simulation of everything we are, carried quietly into the dark, and somewhere out there, beyond the last trace of sunlight, a machine drifts through endless night, still pulsing softly, still whispering to its reflection. I see you. I see you too.